I think all relationships should either be adding value to your life and you also adding value to that person's life, right? So if this relationship is depleting me and every single day I'm tired and stressed and I feel like I'm just nothing, right? Like everything is being taken away from me. That's something that we need to sit down and talk about, right? Because that's not a healthy space to be in, and that's not going to be sustainable long term.
Can you help me understand why I react a certain way in certain situations? I think that that's a great question, trying to better understand our insights and why we do the things that we do. And truly, it's not really a one-size-fits-all answer.
Love this question. What do you suggest would be the best ways to find a therapist? And I think that it's especially important if it's your first time seeking therapy or you're looking for a clinician who's a better fit for you.
So you've been a therapist for what, a little short of a year?
Yeah, so I've been seeing clients for about 3 years now, but full, like actually seeing my own clients where it's like I'm a therapist, I got my own license number for a year, yeah.
What's been the most meaningful part of being a therapist so far?
That's such a good question. I would say, like, as a therapist, you get a really good look inside of people's life, right? And like you get to see their human experience, and it makes you feel normal. It makes the people around you feel normal. And it also gives you more empathy and compassion to what people are going through. I get to have a window into that experience. And I think that that's just something that we don't do because we're just not openly vulnerable, like with our deepest, darkest secrets with just strangers. Like, so as a therapist, I'm holding, you know, I get to hold space for people's things like that they wouldn't necessarily just tell everybody. And I think just having that insight into people's life is like the most amazing and beautiful thing.
You know, I'm not a therapist, but I think when I started therapy, it was something that was so weird.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, I wasn't used to sharing. I could be a suppressor, honestly. And I think when I had to open up, especially to a Black woman, knowing that we experienced the same stuff, and it was really hard for me at the time. But after I broke that barrier and realized, wait, she's literally here to help me.
Yeah.
I grew appreciation for that, and I was able to open up in like a more authentic way. And just out of curiosity, what is your therapy style? Like, what would it be like to be in your session?
Yeah, like for me, it's like I try to be as authentic as possible. And honestly, Taylor, that's something that it's taken time for me to grow into that because in grad school, you're taught a specific way of being a therapist. And for me, working with the clients and the population I work with, especially young Black women, that's just not it. Like it's not as structured, right? Like It's like you have to work with the population. You have to be able to work with different populations, and kind of what I was taught didn't necessarily fit the clients that I knew that I wanted to work with and see. And so like in my therapy session, I'm very authentic. I bring in humor. I'm myself. I try to create a space that makes my client feel comfortable because I think that's the most important thing is like building the therapeutic relationship and building rapport with the client. When you're able to like create this room and it's like you could come here and bring anything. If that's I just want to listen to music today because I'm tired, I had a long day at work, then that's what it is. If it's like let's go outside, let's take a walk, that's what it is, you know? And so I think for me, I see myself like walking alongside the client. This is their journey, this is their space, and I'm there as a support for them in whatever they are in their life. So if it's like, you know, I'm breaking up with that man this week, and we like, okay, girl, we breaking up with him, and then next week it's like, I texted him, Claudia, I don't know what to do. That's fine because that is a part of the human experience and that is our truth, right? And I think that a lot of times in therapy, it's hard to be like, you know, this is my truth or be honest about what our truth is. And I really want my clients to feel comfortable sharing that truth with me and know that this is like a completely judgment-free zone.
Yeah.
And confidential under law.
Yeah. We've gotten into the conversation already a little bit, but something that really stands out to me and your demographic that you serve is you really try to hone in on the Black community and marginalized communities. And you're a Black woman, but why that specific target group?
Yeah, like it's such a need for it. And what I learned in my experience is there's not enough people of color therapists. There's not enough people of color going to therapists, and specifically Black women. Like we need this space more than anything. And so part of me even becoming a therapist and taking this journey of like seeing clients was to serve, you know, people who look like me and be the person who I didn't have when I was younger that I really needed. I think that now the stigma of therapy in the Black community is like, it's still there, absolutely. But I feel like there's been a big shift, a big cultural shift in how we view therapy. And so we need more clinicians who are culturally competent, who want to work with Black people who want to be there for Black people and who want to hold this space, and also challenge, you know, the theories, the things that we've been taught about how therapy should look, right? Because with the shift, like we say, we want to make therapy more accessible. We want to destigmatize therapy. But that also means that we have to create theories that focus on Black women, that focus on working with Black people. Because a lot of the interventions and things that we're taught early on in our careers don't necessarily align with the cultural values of the communities that I serve in particular. And so that's a big push that I think is also necessary when we talk about making therapy more accessible and just like creating this space, right? Because that is part of it, is having more Black clinicians, having more people who feel comfortable like serving the Black community and who know what they're talking about too, right? But it's also like the theories and the things, like we have to make sure that these things align with the values of the community, the values of our culture. And so I think that's equally as important.
Yeah, when you talk about stigma, when we were in college, I remember therapy being something that people started to go to. And I was still embarrassed, though, to say that I'm going to the counseling center because there is a stigma that I'm crazy or there's something extremely wrong with me. And I'm just glad to see that it is slowly but surely changing. And you talked about being the change that you want to see, but something that's really specific to you. I mean, you're a Black woman, but you're also Gen Z.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a unique perspective that the new generation of therapists are bringing, because we are the generation that grew up in the age of social media. We are the age where we've had such transitional phases within the pandemic and of like financial crises, wars, and we're able to see it firsthand on our phones. And so I think there's a different perspective that you can bring to it. Can you just talk a little bit about what is it like to be a Gen Z therapist?
Yeah, I think that I'm so glad to be a part of this shift, right? And like you said, social media is just it's so new and it's so big in the way that we're seeing therapy. I think COVID like pushed a lot of this too, like the use of technology for telehealth and things like that. And I actually went through grad school during COVID. So for me, I was like, you know, before that, people think that like virtual or technology, it's a bad thing. Social media, they associate it with being a bad thing, but it's how can this be beneficial? And I think that for therapy, it made it more accessible because you don't have to go to the office anymore. You can bring it into your home. You could be on your lunch break at work and meet with your therapist, right? Like, so it makes it more accessible. And I forgot the question.
Girl, me too. But you were eating out.
Okay.
And something that I think is also really cool is we are the generation who are very, very, very open about how we're feeling. We intellectualize our emotions. We will go on social media and say, this is how I feel. And I actually think it can be hindering in the sense that we're intellectualizing everything and maybe not feeling everything. But I do think it's a cool perspective that we're able to be like, no, I'm going to show my raw and authentic self on social media.
You know what, Taylor? The good thing I really think that comes from that and like this storytelling, like telling your narrative. And that's something that I bring into the room. My clients, one of my modalities that I use is narrative therapy, right? And that's externalizing the person from the problem, allowing them to be the narrator of their own story. And when we think about social media, it has allowed people to tell their truth, to tell their story. And so someone across the world can be like, I relate to what this person has shared. I relate to that experience that they had. I feel the way they feel, and they said they went to therapy. Does that mean that it's okay for me to go to therapy? And so it can be influential in that way of just connecting with people who you didn't even realize had the same experiences as you. And it makes you feel a little bit more normal. Like, wow, I'm not the only one going through this. And I think that that's the really beautiful thing about technology and social media and just this new age of like therapy. Like it's been really amazing. I think being a part of that shift of just being authentic in the therapy room, being a therapist who people feel they could connect with, talk about everyday life with. I think it brings like a different perspective and some fresh air into the room.
100%. And, you know, I live in DC now, and you talked a lot about connection. And I found out recently that Washington, D.C. is one of the loneliest cities in the country. And people are longing for connection. People are longing for community, which is why I felt like this was such an important conversation that you and I are having, because we're going to talk about relationships. And I think that that's something that people are really excited to talk about, but also don't have a lot of understanding about. And so before we dive into the nitty gritty of relationships, as what's it's like to be in a relationship or pursue a relationship in Gen Z, we're going to play a game. It's called red flag, green flag. And what you're going to do is I'm going to give you some topics and don't think too much about it.
Okay.
And just let me know if it's a red flag or a green flag in relationships from your perspective as a marriage and family therapist.
Okay.
All right.
I like
You ready?
that. Yeah, let's do it.
All righty. So the first one is going through your partner's phone. Red flag or green flag?
Red flag.
Explain.
Red flag, because it's a boundary and privacy violation. And I think that also you should trust your partner. And if you don't trust your partner, come to therapy, couples therapy.
Okay, so it's a boundary shift, right?
It's a boundary shift, right? Yeah.
So what are ways to gain trust in a relationship if going through your phone is not one?
I think that communication is the most important thing. So if I'm feeling about a situation, I feel that, I'm a little bit confused about this girl pictures you liking on Instagram or whatever, let's talk about it before I jump to conclusions, right? Because I think in relationships, a lot of times where we go left is when we don't give the benefit of the doubt. A benefit of a doubt to the person that we are in this intimate space with, right? And so giving your partner the benefit of the doubt, don't let them play you though, but I think that it's important to communicate and have that conversation. Hey, I'm feeling uncomfortable about this. What's going on, right? And hopefully you have a partner who's receptive to having that conversation with you and who's also on that same intellectual level where they're emotionally available to talk about these things, right? Because that's another problem that might exist in relationships is, hey, I could talk about these difficult conversations, but you might not be ready. And so how do we navigate that? And where do we go from there?
Don't let them play you, but
Don't
trust
let
your
them
partner.
play you.
I got you. Okay, red flag or green flag? Blocking.
I think green flag, if there's a reason if there's a reason to block somebody and you feel like that's, the best way, I think that could be a green flag. I think.
Okay. What about
context?
Okay, I can make up one.
Okay.
So I think obviously blocking can come in place. That could be a boundary itself, right?
Yeah.
But blocking in the sense of I had an argument or blocking or I need space from you.
Yeah.
How would you describe that?
Blocking for the night, but I'm going to be back on your line tomorrow.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say, communicate. I think that kind of goes with a little bit with the first one too, right? It's like this idea of a lot of times we jump to the most extreme. Like we had a conflict, so now the relationship is over. We got into it, so now the relationship is over. But in reality, that's not our truth. Our truth is I love this person. I don't want to break up with them or, I want to work through this. And I know that in my head, but because I'm not able to manage my emotions and hold space for them, I jump to that because that feels safe. And so I think that communication is a big thing, especially with that as well. And also kind of slowing down the process of maybe it's not we talk about this big conflict right now. Maybe we break it down and we come back to it later. Another thing that I say, like with my couples who I work with, is that conflict is not a bad thing. We've grown up in a society where they taught us that conflict is inherently bad. And it's not. Conflict is a vehicle of us trying to incite change in our life, right? Trying to do something different. So it's not about the conflict itself. It's about how we go about the conflict. So with my couples, I call it fighting fair, right? Are we listening to understand each other? Are we listening to hold space for the other person? Are we listening to get our point across and say, hey, I'm right and you're...
Yeah, and I think that it can be really hard. I also thought that conflict was bad because if there's friction, then that means that there's tension and there's you don't like me anymore. And so I think that I used to shy away from that too, but that does make you go to the extreme and it leaves room for you to kind of be delulu and come up with your own narrative in your head. So so blocking is semi red flag. Yeah, as long as you communicate. It's yellow flag.
Yellow.
Okay. Red flag or green flag? Being financially stable in your 20s.
In your 20s, I would say that let's call it a yellow flag, right? Because we do want some level of awareness of what are my financial goals? Where do I want to be going? Even if I'm not there yet, where am I heading? Do we have an outlook for the future, right? We're not just out here just, no pants down, just doing the whole thing, right? So it's a yellow flag because in our 20s, we're also just getting into our career. Maybe we don't even know what our career is. We're still exploring. And it should absolutely be space for that. And I think that social media, when we talk about the positives and negatives of social media, right, it pushes an agenda that you have to have it all together and that everyone around you has it all together, right? And you buy your girl a Mercedes or, just all of the things that may be unrealistic expectations placed on us. So I think that a part of it is like, yeah, you can be financially stable and at least have an outlook on where you're going or what your hopes and goals are for your finances. But I also think that there has to be space of, okay, this is something I'm growing into, or I'm just learning how to manage my finances. And especially for young Black people who are, entering another social class that maybe their parents weren't in, you don't have a lot of information on financial literacy. So we're already starting at a deficit. And I think that it's important for us to understand that and really know that this is a topic that I have to study, I have to learn to feel competent about it, and giving your partner too space to grow in that as well.
That's a really good point, because I had a conversation actually with a financial podcaster and one of our former. You watched that episode?
I watched that. I love that.
You watched it?
She was talking.
But one of the main things she brought up is women in particular weren't even allowed to have credit cards until like recently, and our country is very, very new, and so there's a lot of systems that are put in place that are forever evolving because we're such new. So I think there's a level of grace that we can give ourselves, but I agree with you. I remember that I thought that I would be at a certain financial space when I was 22, like, I'm gonna be rich by 25, and I'm 26,
I'm gonna have it all.
Right? And so I think there's a level of maturity and grace that comes with that, but I agree with you. You have to have goals. You have to be working towards financial freedom, because it is important. And from my understanding in the research that I looked up, that one of the number one ways people divorce is because of finances. And so I do think it's that deep, but I think that, like you said, there's a level of growing with that. Red flag or green flag, testing people or playing games?
Red flag.
So let's talk about testing real quick. Yeah. Because it takes a level of trust. And so people will put these little pockets or gems in people.
Well, yellow flag.
Explain that.
Because maybe we're collecting data, and maybe it's just we're gathering information about whether this relationship is right for us. So it maybe is a little, I don't know.
Okay, so what's the fine line, though, between collecting data and playing games with somebody?
I think that when you know what your intention is that, hey, I don't want to be with this person long term. I'm not, invested in this relationship, and I'm still stringing them along or giving them the idea that I am. I think that really crosses over into that territory of playing games. And that's when people really can get their, heartbroken. They could get hurt. And on top of that, for you as the person doing that, you're not clear in communicating, because if I'm someone saying like, okay, I really don't want to be with this person, but I'm stringing them along, there's some communication breakdown on my end that's happening, because I could be honest in that and speak my truth and say, hey, I'm not feeling this, or, I think that we should take some time apart.
Red flag or green flag, getting in a relation fast? I'm gonna repeat that because I had a typo.
Okay.
I had a verbal typo. Red flag or green flag to get in a relationship really fast?
I think that can be a yellow flag. I feel like all my flags have been yellow. Are they all yellow? But I think that this is a yellow flag because it's really dependent on the people in the relationship. So if y'all vibing, you feel like, this is your person, and you all do move fast. And then just speaking for myself, I know that I've been in relationships that have moved fast, but I feel like when you know. So it really depends, and it just feels like if it feels right for those two people and they feel like, okay, this is the person I want to be with, I do want to move faster, then I think it is go for it. Because I know people got married in 3-4 months and they still together. People who've been together for years and end up getting married, or they just fall off, So it just depends.
Yeah, my aunt and uncle actually got married within 6 months. And I was like, period.
I love that.
Yeah, when you know, okay?
When you know.
Is it a red flag or green flag to have delayed communication or boundaries within your communication?
No, I think that's a green flag. I think boundaries in our communication are extremely important. And I think that social media and just us being on our phone all the time, having constant access to our phone, it gives the idea that we immediately have to respond, right? And that people should be immediately accessible. And sometimes that's just not sustainable. We have lives, we have work, we have all the things. And sometimes we're just emotionally drained and exhausted. 100%. And I think that it can be an unrealistic expectation that even our friends, right? Not even just romantic partners, but our friends can expect a response instantly. And sometimes we just don't have the capacity for that. So I think that if I'm able to look at a message and be like, yeah, I can't respond to that right now, that's a green flag. Because I'm telling myself that it's a lot lot, and I can't do that right now. And so that's always, I feel very healthy.
You know, I think it's crazy how, I mean, Gen Z, we've been talking about this time and over again, that we're a social media generation. Yeah. And I do think that there's a level of accessibility that you think you have. Like, do you remember when, I think Instagram still does this, I turned mine off, like the green dot where, you know, people are online. And I remember this guy that I used to like in college, I saw him on, but he didn't respond to my message. I was like, I know you so much text message. And it's
you're
like,
online.
You're online. So that means that you're ignoring me. And it's and when now at my bigger age, at age of 26, I realized, no, I'm exhausted. I've worked out, like I've done all the things, and now I just want to decompress on my phone and not talk to anybody, regardless of how much I like you or not. Well, I appreciate you playing that game.
That was fun.
No, I think it's important to know what are red flags and green flags. And honestly, it's subjective, right? Everybody has their own levels of how to do relationship and stuff, but I do think that there are some things that's like, okay, y'all, like we need to calm down a little bit. Yeah,
we get a lot of messages from social media on how we should behave, how we should act, and we take those and internalize them as our truth, and sometimes they're not our truth. And so, a green flag, social media detox. Sometimes I just need a break from other people's life, right? And I think that can be a green flag, knowing when it's okay to step away for a moment.
Speaking of stepping away, let's go a little deeper into relationships, right? So I think that, I know we have been known to be the generation of cancel culture. Yeah. And if things aren't sitting right with us, if things aren't settling our peace, we dip out. Yeah. And so in your perspective, what is the fine line between walking away from a relationship or laboring with a relationship?
Yeah, I think it comes down to knowing our personal values, our personal boundaries, and then respect, right, for ourselves. So with personal values, what are my values? What are the things that this relationship is bringing me? What am I bringing to this relationship? How is it serving me, right? Does it align with my values? Does it have the similar foundational principles, right? Like, are we going the same place? Because it's like, oh, I want to get married, but this person, they don't see that in their future. Or I want to have children. This person, they might not see that in their future. Where are we on our values? Then I'll talk about boundaries, right? You don't want anyone who disrespects your boundaries, right? But there should be some room for forgiveness, depending, you know? So I think, too, like personal boundaries. What are my boundaries? Are these my non-negotiables? What are things that I can accept in a relationship? What are things that I won't accept in a relationship? So knowing that for yourself before you even go out there and like start dating and getting into, you know, things with people. And then just the bottom line is respect in all relationships, romantic or friendships. Like, does this person respect me? Do I respect them? And is this a healthy space for me to be in? Because I think all relationships should either be adding value to your life and you also adding value to that person's life, right? So if this relationship is depleting me and every single day I'm tired and stressed and I feel like I'm just nothing, right? Like everything is being taken away from me. That's something that we need to sit down and talk about, right? Because that's not a healthy space to be in and that's not going to be sustainable long term. So kind of understanding it's a little gray area, right? Like a little fine line, because a lot of times we love people, but they're not in the space where they're able to really respect our boundaries and our values and grow with us in the way that we're growing.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. Especially, I'm going to speak from a friendship level because I've walked away from more friendships. And I think it's something that I can love you, I can wish the best for you, but I can also walk away from it. But that's really hard. I think, and Elaine Weltroff has coined this term of ride or die syndrome, and how Black women in particular think that if I'm just laboring with someone, if I'm loyal, then that means that, you know, I'm a healthy person. I know how to like stand the test of time. But actually, she talks about how that's actually not as beneficial as you think. And I do like the fact that this boundary word is coming up more and more, because it's one of those things where like, okay, no, I feel like my boundaries are constantly being violated. Yeah. It's time for me to dip out. It's time to dip out. Yeah. And kind of going along with that, I mean, 75% of Gen Z is single.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a stat.
That's a stat. And I'm wondering, can you hone in on what your observations of that can be? I mean, I have my own thoughts about social media and how there's a lot of accessibility to people, and you think that there's more people out there than there really is. I think that the pandemic has played a lot of that, where we have social anxiety. And I think that dating apps, I mean, I can go on and on about why I think that there may be a reason why people are being more single. People are more educated and more after their careers. There's several thoughts that I have, but I'm wondering from your own level of expertise, what are some of the reasons why that is?
Yeah, I think one of the big things you touched on is like this illusion of options, right? Like social media, dating apps, all of the things have given us this idea that we have so many options available. So it's easy to just swipe left or right. Whichever one is, I don't want them no more. You swipe that way.
Right.
I swipe left on you. And then I have another option of someone else that I can talk to, right? And so a lot of times it makes it harder to pour value into our relationships when I know that if this doesn't work out, I can just go grab something else, or I could just go start this thing with someone else. And that can be exhausting too, emotionally exhausting. On the upside though, it gives us opportunity that like, if something isn't working out and this is no longer serving me, there are other options available. But I think a big part of us just not being in as many committed relationships is that fear of commitment too as well. And seeing a lot of failed relationships. A lot of us grew up seeing our parents' relationships fail and people around us relationships fail. And now we have so many options that maybe they didn't have. So it makes it easier for us to say, no, I'm not going to commit. I could just swipe left or right.
Speaking of swiping left or right, Tinder was created in 2013, and there was ways to connect and date prior to that from an online platform. But like you said, swiping left or right, Tinder really changed the dating game of how people are able to just have these endless options. I have heard really successful relationships come out of, like, I'm even going to be in a wedding and they met on Hinge. But I'm wondering, how is this affecting the way people communicate or the way people connect?
Yeah, I think it's shifting, right, with the generations, and kind of how we said, like, it's a shift in everything. And a lot of times we have been made out to say social media is bad, technology is bad, but let's look at the pros of this, right? And having all of this accessibility allows us to connect with people that maybe we never would have met. Like, a lot of times it was people we went to high school with. Then when we went to college, it's people we went to college with. As we got older, it's people we work with. So social media and dating apps give us more selection of people who maybe we wouldn't have came across. And it does allow for more connection, right, when used properly. And allow us to date people that maybe we never would have had the opportunity to date. So it is an upside to it. It's like being able to connect with people that we probably wouldn't have met prior.
You know, something that I have had conversations with my friends lately is just being more open-minded to dating people outside our race, outside our preference, outside maybe our preferred age gap. And I'm not talking about dating people that are significantly younger than you. Don't do that. But I'm just talking about maybe just being open, like, oh, I can date a couple years older, a couple years younger. And I'm wondering, where is this shift coming from? And there's this narrative, I'm not going to lie, and I want you to address it. People are saying, like, men of color are just not being committed. And I want to know your thoughts, your insights about that.
Yeah, I think that it all stems back to systemic factors, right? We have to just be honest and be real. And a lot of my research that I got to conduct focuses on Black families, right? And this narrative of broken homes that have been not things that we've decided, but they've been placed on us, right? Like, this dates far back into segregation, even further than that, of how Black men in the home, that wasn't allowed, right? A Black man in the home mean that you couldn't get social services. You might not have access to the things that you need. Black men are massively incarcerated in our country. So there's so many factors that play into why there's just not as many Black men readily available for relationships, right? And so, one, as Black women, we need to support our brothers.
Hey.
And do what we got to do to support our brothers. And also, too, pour into them. And as Black men, we need to understand and operate. Well, not we. I'm not a Black man. But as Black men, it's important that they also walk into that, right? And walk into their truth and understand that history and how loaded it is, and really decide their own values. What is it that they want for their future? Even if it's not family or relationship, just defining what it is that they want for their future, I think is important so that we can get on the same page. But yeah, I think a lot of it is just systemic level things that have been passed down from generation to generation that have impacted us. It dates back to racism. It dates back to segregation. It dates back to Black people just having unequal access and equity. And it has created a lot of broken families, and that has been our example and our model. And as a family therapist, one of the things that I have really had the opportunity to focus on is the family system, right? A lot of times we don't realize how these generational patterns are passed down. So one thing that I do with almost all my clients, whether it's a couple, an individual, a family, I sit down with them and we draw out a genogram. A genogram is essentially a family tree. And what we look at is family patterns. That could be patterns of mental health, financial literacy. That can be patterns of people who have alcoholism or substance use disorder. And so when you start drawing these patterns out, even conflict, like, okay, I had a really bad conflict with my mom. Me and my mom were never on the same page. You look back, okay, your mom and her mom were never on the same page. Her mom and her mom were never on the same page. It's so beautiful to be able to see these patterns come together, and people don't even realize it. It like really is crazy when you look at these patterns. Or even like, I'll even speak to my own like experience and like looking at my genogram. When I drew it out and I did this in grad school, I realized, wow, almost every single Black man in my family has some issue with alcohol, right? Like, and you could like literally see like generation to generation to generation up 3-4 levels of, wow, the Black man in this family have struggled with substance use, have struggled with alcohol use. And so you can see family patterns, how they play out over time. And a lot of times we say, oh, I want to break generational patterns. I want to build generational wealth. Well, it's important to learn the patterns first, because what is you breaking if you don't know what it is?
Ooh, that's
and
a word.
Yeah, like you got to learn those family patterns. But when you draw out that genogram, I think it's so cool, like, to do that with my clients and just see, like, wow, this is something that not only you are struggling with, but it has been going on in your family for generations. And you could do it even with illness, like different things that have come up, obesity, so many things. That genogram gonna tell it all.
Dang, you know what? You have me thinking, because, and I've talked about this a little before in one of my prior episodes, but the way I address being upset. And I talked about how my mom starts to clean and just gets quiet and kind of shuts down, and how I will do the exact same thing. And it's essentially learned behavior. And I think that it's important to address the fact that, okay, this isn't just me doing this. This has been in my family. And you raise another point. When we talk about mental health, I mean, I've recognized that anxiety and depression are also like in my family. And I'm wondering, how does mental health show up? Because you talked about the systemic barriers that causes mental health. And so how does that affect how people show up in relationships?
Yeah, one of the things as Black people that we deal with on the day-to-day is intergenerational trauma. And that is literally built in our genes, from the things our ancestors have historically faced, racism, the things they've been through in our society. That's built into us, into our DNA. It's literally research that shows that, right? And so those things come out in relationships. And like you said, Taylor, like patterns, right, too, of like, this is how my mom handled conflict. So early on, before I even knew what conflict was, that's how I learned to handle conflict.
Right.
Those are the messages we get about it. So then I go into my new relationship with my partner who I've chosen, and I do those same things that my mom did. And now guess what? I have all of those same issues that were going on in my intermediate family. Now I have them in my new family that I've chosen. And so when we don't understand the patterns that we're up against, when we don't understand the things that have came before us, we're not able to change them. And I think that the therapy process allows us to bring those things to the forefront, to understand them, to gain insight on them, and then to decide, okay, what are the things that I want to keep and what are the things that I want to change?
And you talked about being aware of the things that were passed down to us. Okay, but once we have that awareness, then what? Like, how do we start breaking those cycles? Because, I mean, the reality is therapy can be expensive. There are a lot of resources that makes it a little more accommodating, but there are a lot of barriers between that. So what are some of the practical steps that we can take to overcome some of these barriers?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is deciding, okay, I have this information. What do I do with it? Like you said, what is it that I want my life to look like? What does this mean to me? So gathering like meaning from it, right? It's like, okay, all the women in my family are into it with each other, but that's not what I want to pass on to my daughters. I want us to have a relationship where we are, compassionate, where I understand them. Okay, well, what did that look like for me growing up? For me growing up, that looked like you don't get no say because you a kid, so you need to stay in a child's place. So now as a mother, like when I go into motherhood, I want to allow space for my child to have a voice. So it's things like that, and it's minimal things that create the bigger change. That's another thing I like to tell my clients is yeah, we have really big goals, and that's great, right? It's always the big goal, but it's the small little bites of that big goal that get us to where we're going. Because just chewing off the whole thing is not sustainable, and usually we can't just change overnight. It's little things that help us get to that process of change.
Yeah, and something that I have recognized is my family, the women are so high achievers. Mm-hmm. They are very ambitious, but they're also very high functioning. Yeah. And I think that we can just go through life without really dealing and sitting with our emotions. And so once I realized that, I was like, I don't like that. Mm-hmm. I want to change that. And it's been really, really challenging, but I know that I want to have the emotional, and I'm not saying my family doesn't have emotional intelligence, but I'm saying I want to be able to sit with my emotions, to deal with myself, to feel, so that way my children will be able to sit with themselves and feel and have self-compassion in those moments where they're maybe not the best. But yeah, that's something that I've just been like thinking about. And I think that's really important when it comes to relationships, because yeah, we're in our 20s, but I think the work that we do right now is going to affect us later. And I think statistics show by 30, you're pretty much fixed. Not that there's no room for change, but that you're pretty much stuck in your ways. Yeah.
Yep. And Taylor, you touched on something that I think is just so important, is this idea for Black women that we have to be the strong Black woman. We have to be high achieving. We have to get it all done at our own expense. And my research focused on role strain and Black women in Inglewood, Chicago, right? So role strain is I have multiple roles. I'm a mother. I'm also working 2 jobs. I'm also caring for my elderly parents. I'm also trying to make ends meet. All of these stress factors have negative outcomes for us, right? And negative outcomes for our relationship. And so I looked at how relationships can support us when we're coping with role strain. How do relationships help us? How do they hinder us? And what I've learned in that research is that having a supportive partner, having positive relationships, even if they're just friend relationships of people that I can go to, a support network, has much beneficial outcomes, because now I have someone that I can share that load with. I have someone that even if I can't share the load with, I can have a conversation with them about it. And so when we talk about access to therapy, sometimes it's just these things that people, it's bigger things that, like, under insurance, like, it's expensive. There's barriers to getting therapy, right? But what can I do in my everyday life that's therapeutic? And sometimes it's just a call to a friend. Sometimes it's just a moment where I journal. Sometimes it's just a moment where I step away and I take a deep breath. How can I bring therapy into my everyday life, even if that's not sitting in the room with a clinician?
That's a really, really, really good point. And because I recognize with myself, I can go to therapy all year round. Mm-hmm. There's times where I need breaks, but in those in-between moments, how am I going to be able to center myself? Yeah. Because I felt like at a point I had a lot of codependency on my therapist, and I would spend a lot of times talking about one thing, and then I would walk away from it like, okay, I got that off my chest, but this, and this happened as well, and I didn't get to that. So what are the things that I can do in my everyday life to be able to cope with that? And that brings me to another point, just going on mental health and in relationships. What does it look like to be able to, we talked about what it means to walk away, but what does it look like to labor with a partner? Because going back to this cancel culture and be able to like drop people and that they'll just be somebody else, and we'll just find somebody else. But what does it look like to actually labor with a person?
And you're right. It's so easy to walk away, right? It's difficult to stay especially when things are hard. It's difficult to stay and sit with that and be in an uncomfortable space, especially with somebody you're romantically interested in, right? Or that's your partner, or someone who's betrayed you or hurt you. And so I think that one of the biggest things, like when we talk about that, is thinking about the outcome. One, is this something that I'm able to forgive? Is this something that, am I able to be in this space with this person knowing that they wronged me or that I wronged them? And then also being able to communicate is going to be even more important, right? When things like this come up, or when we're in deep conflict with someone we love, or when we're struggling to know if we want to be in this relationship or not. Like, that communication piece is everything, because that allows you to get on the same page. Because if I say, hey, Taylor, this is how I'm feeling about this, and you're not receptive to that, and you can't understand that, it shuts down the whole thing. One of the things that the Gottmans, which is a popular couple in marriage and family therapy, theorize is the 4 horsemen that are present in our relationships. That's stonewalling, criticism, content, and defensiveness. And they predict that when those 4 things are present, divorce rates are higher, breakups are higher, like by a long shot, right? And so I always, when I talk about relationships and just dealing with conflict, like, let's not be defensive. Let's not criticize our partner, right? Let's try to talk with compassion and empathy. Like, this is somebody we actually love. I think that a lot of times in our relationship, we could get disrespectful really quickly because we have built some comfortability with this person, but we'll say things to our partner that maybe we wouldn't say to people on the street. And then contempt, like talking down on our partner. Let's not do that. Let's not be defensive, you know, and then stonewalling, I think, is a really important one that I know a lot of people in our generation do. Is like, you make me upset or you piss me off, I'm going to just shut down. I'm not going to talk to you at all. And it's some space for that, right? Like, let's take a moment and step away and then we can come back to it. But let's not just completely just stonewall and ignore, because that can lead to more hurt and harm later on down the road.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think even though maybe the relationship may not be as deep or as far forward, I think there's this term of ghosting and just like leaving people where they are. And I think it's mean. I've been ghosted and I've ghosted before. And I just think that there's just like, yeah, I'm good on you. Yeah. And I've had conversations with a lot of my friends, and I don't think you owe people everything, but I do think there's a level of, this is a human, this is a person, and I want to make sure that I'm meeting you where you are and I'm having a good conversation with you. And something that you said also was getting disrespectful sometimes with your partner. Sometimes it's like, if you go low, what is it? If you go low, I'll go lower.
I'll go lower.
Right? And I think sometimes that comes from these expectations, sometimes unrealistic expectations. And that's, I'm not here to down social media. I think social media is amazing, but I do think that there's this relationship goals, or I've admired couples on social media, or I see that girl getting a Birkin for her 25th birthday. I want a Birkin.
I want a steak dinner where you pay for all 40 of my friends.
I want to go to a bar and you pay for her, and her, because you just got it like that.
I want the bin.
But like, I'm wondering, how damaging is that? Because that might be someone's reality, right? But that's not everybody's truth. And I'm just wondering, what are ways that we can kind of combat those societal standards?
Yeah, it's so difficult. And these are the messages that we're up against every day, all the time. Because the first thing we do in the morning, usually, well, I pray first thing in the morning. But the first thing that a lot of us do in the morning, right, is check our feed. We get on our phones, we text, you know, we check in with social media. And those are the messages that we're getting, right? And the thing about social media is that people portray the best parts of their life, which is amazing. We love to see people win. But it's never the things that may be hard to deal with, the difficult truths of life. And so when we're looking at other people's relationships, it's easy to get stuck in the comparison of like, oh, wow, I don't have that. Does that mean that my relationship is not valuable? Does that mean that I'm not worthy as a person of those things? Does that mean that my partner is not capable of giving me those things, so I got to go find somebody else who can do that? And so it allows us to get in our head really quickly. And it could be a very, very, very slippery slope when we get into this idea of comparison, especially with relationships, especially.
But I'm going to be devil's advocate for a second. So are we expecting couples to just also air out their business and talk about the low side? Because, the people show the curated side, the happy side, but do they need to show the bad side? Like, no. I feel like there's a level of like, you're not being genuine with your relationship. And I just think it's really interesting about the expectations that people have on other people's relationships. But it is refreshing sometimes to see a couple maybe give us or shed light a little bit into something that they dealt with. Yeah,
it is absolutely refreshing. Like, or even just like knowing that, like we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, is this narrative, right? Knowing that someone shares a similar narrative to me and that they were able to, you know, get through it. And I think like with relationships in particular, like even older couples, like for a younger couple like myself, for example, like having a mentor in a relationship that have been married for a while or who has, been through some stuff. They done been through some stuff, so they could like give us more insight on like, okay, this is the communication that you all need to have, or just give some feedback. I think that's healthy. And kind of what we were talking about with social media, right? Like, yeah, people aren't posting their dirty laundry on social media. That's just the truth of it. And it is really beautiful to see like a lot of these stories that are other people's truth, right? And their narrative. And so we don't want to downplay that as well. It's amazing to see people all over the world in love doing their thing. But it's a balance of understanding that just because that's their reality, it doesn't mean that it's my reality, nor does it mean that it's the only correct reality or the way that life should be or the human experience should be. Because at the end of the day, we're all extremely diverse people. That's what makes us unique. That's what attracts us to our partner. That's what makes us who we are out in the world. And so just understanding that your lived experience is going to be different from mine. The way you see the world is going to be different from mine. But that doesn't mean that my experience is any less valuable.
And going off of that and just understanding that everybody's different, we have talked a lot about dating and how 20-somethings are more likely to be single and we're just doing our own thing and we don't have commitment. But there are people that are getting married, that are starting families. And I just want to know from your perspective, how are you all shedding light on that? Like, how are you all weighing in on some of the younger marriages? And something that's also really interesting is people are like, you have time to date and to live your life and you're young, but people are less likely getting married. Yeah. And so can you just reveal some more about that?
Yeah, like, I think a lot of it is like this commitment, right? And I think it can be discouraging knowing that like marriage is a value of mine. It's something that I want, and I don't see people who I'm interested in who are interested in being married, right? Like that can be disheartening as a Black woman or as anybody who's seeking a long-term committed relationship and not seeing that out there. And then on the other hand, like you said, there are so many young couples like getting married, having children. Like I love to see it. And I think that it might even be like an uptick from previous generations as far as just like us deciding to go for it and stepping out foot first. And it's like, I think too, like a big part of your 20s is this exploration phase, right? And that's not something that we want to take away. It's like this opportunity to see the world, to explore new things, to explore new people, to see what might align with me, what might not align with me. And sometimes that process takes time, right? It might take a 2-year relationship to say, okay, I was really in it with this person and I learned a lot from that relationship, but it's not for me. And so I think a lot of times when we end a relationship or we step away from something, we see it as a failure. And it's not always a failure. It's a part of our story. There's lessons that we've learned from it. There's areas that we've grown in. There's experiences that we share. Maybe we were vulnerable with this person. And those are all wins and things that can be considered. So I think a lot of times when things don't work out, it's easy for us to just jump to it failed. This didn't work out. We broke up. I saw a video the other day, which I really loved on social media, on TikTok. I saw a video the other day where this young woman, she talked about that process of how she was in a 5-year relationship. She ended up stepping away from the relationship, but she didn't see it as a breakup. She saw it as all of these beautiful experiences that they shared, the places that they traveled, the things they did together, the people they got to know, each other's families, those sorts of things. So I think it's really how you frame it and what you think of these experiences that you're having, right? So it's one thing to be like, okay, I'm so gung-ho on getting married. Okay, what does marriage mean to you? What is the important value that you're seeking, right? And understanding those values and how they align with our life and our greater purpose, I think is so important.
Yeah, I think it is important. And I have a few more questions for you, but we've been talking a lot about relationships with other people. Mm-hmm. And I think it's time to talk about relationship with self. Ooh. And something that happens, I'll speak for myself, when there are failed relationships or where there are things where maybe you've fallen short, I think I can base a lot of that on me and my identity. And I wasn't good enough. And it just can be very tricky and very hard. And 20s are filled with transitions and breakups and changes in relationships. And so what are some tangible things that people can do to overcome heartbreak?
One of the things that I'm hearing you saying that is like this negative self-talk, and we all do it, right? We all get into the I'm not good enough, I'm this person didn't want me, I'm stepping away from this, or even like I'm not worthy. These are the bigger messages that even if we're not saying these things to ourselves, these are the bigger messages that we're considering in our mind when we leave a relationship or when someone, leaves a relationship with us. It makes us question things. Like naturally, that's just us as humans. So I think that tangible things that we can do to really feel like, okay, secure in where we are and where we're going is deciding, okay, what does this look like? What am I hoping to accomplish? What do I want out of my life? What do I want to give? Like, what values do I want to give? What values do I want to receive in my partnerships? And those sorts of things. When we understand and are able to decide those things for ourselves, I think that we can make better decisions about the people who we bring into our space in our life, because time is limited, right? And even in our 20s, like, I think we're at the point where we're like, wow, life is going by fast, you know. After 25, really after 20, it felt like everything just sped up, you know, after college and everything. So I think that we're at the point where we realize how limited time is and that we don't have forever for everything. And as women, we're up against a biological clock, you know, if you want to have children too. So that's something else to consider. So we feel the pressure of this, and of wanting to, if it's something that we want, like a relationship, we feel that pressure on our shoulders, and it can weigh heavy. It could be a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think it can be a lot. And I think that you can put, like you said, a lot of negative self-talk, and you can spend most of your time in your singleness focusing on a potential relationship. And I think something that I learned in my singleness was really just sitting with myself, really finding out what I like, dating myself, figuring out what's best for me before I even think to weigh in with a partner or somebody else. So no, I think that's really important. And we're going to shift gears a little bit. We've been real deep. So let's get a little fluttery. Let's get the heart flutters, because something that's recent for you is you just recently got engaged.
Oh my God, dude.
So not only are you talking about marriage and marriage and family therapy, but you also have some credibility because you've been in a relationship. And can you just tell me how you have evolved in your relationship? Because you started in college, you had your relationship in college. So how have you evolved with your belief systems about love?
Wow, it's been like such an incredible journey. Not an easy journey at all. Like, it's just been, but it's been amazing and so rewarding. Like, and for me, like you said, my relationship started in undergrad. So we was, you know, really young. We was getting into it. And after college, we were long distance. So it was just such a big shift. So I've gotten to know this person at different phases of their growth. They've gotten to know me at different phases of my personal growth, and they've seen different, you know, areas for me, like even growing in my career, like seeing me when I was in school struggling writing papers, and now it's like, okay, well, now you're a therapist, you're this, you know, you're a child welfare specialist, like you're all of these things. So that growth process, I think that that's been the most beautiful thing about being in a partnership, is just having somebody to grow with you through the beautiful moments, but also through the tough times, like supporting you when things are difficult, working through conflict, being able to forgive and to give love, to receive love. It's been an incredible journey. It has not been an easy journey at all. I love my man, but it ain't been an easy journey, but I think it's been incredible. And I think it speaks to the truth of our 20s too, of that everything is not easy, and we're learning, right? Like, we're learning how to love. We're learning how to give. I'm learning how to love him in the way that he needs to be loved. He's learning how to love me in the way that I need to be loved. And that can be a process, right? And that can change. Like, how I want to receive love now might look different, you know, in a few years, or after I have children, or, you know, that might shift. And so learning how to shift with your partner and grow with them, I think, too, is such an important conversation when we think about growth, and when we think about 20s too, right? Like, this is such a formative time for forming relationships, whether it's friendships or romantic relationships, and just seeing like how our friends have developed. And I think we could see it too, like even us being sorority sisters, sorors. Even us being sorority sisters, it's been beautiful to see like us in those early stages, and then like people thinking about their career or shifting careers, and then watching people grow into their full potential, being a witness to that. It's just been amazing. And I think that goes with relationships too, is like starting off early, like, what is this gonna be? You know, are we talking? And then it's like, wow, we're engaged. Like, that's serious. So I think it's really beautiful. It is.
And you talked about the complexity and how it hasn't been linear and it's been hard.
Yeah.
But I want to know, what have you learned about yourself with being in a committed relationship?
I learned I'm not perfect, and I don't have all the answers. And I learned that my way of doing things is not always the best way, and it's not always the only way. We're different people, and a lot of times we get so stuck on, okay, this is my way of doing it, so this is how it should be done. And I'm very much that person of like, I have a quick way to do it. We could do the long way, that's your way, or we could do my quick way. But sometimes what's the harm in taking a longer way if that's your partner's normal response, right? Like, what's the harm in allowing your partner to lead? What's the harm in stepping back sometime, right? I don't have to always have the end decision. I don't always have to be the voice. Like, we're working on the same team. And that's something that I work with my couples as well. It's like getting on the same team. You're not the enemy. Like, we're not in competition. Me and you are on the same team, and we're going towards a goal. Let's work together to get towards that goal, even if it's not the way that I think it should be done.
Yeah, I like that aspect of like we're a team, we're a partnership, like we're figuring this out together, and what looks one way for me may look differently for you. As a therapist, you give a lot of advice and a lot of insight about relationships, but what is one of the best advices you've ever gotten when it comes to relationships?
Wow. Two things that I've gotten. One is don't go to bed mad at each other. That's hard.
Biblical.
Yeah. Oh, that's biblical. I love it.
I think. Fact check me.
If that's biblical, thank you, Jesus. I love that. Because, don't go to bed mad at each other. And the other one is time is limited, right? You don't know how long you have someone in your life, and you should value them and give them their flowers while they're here. And, like, even in my relationship, it's so important that I'm always thankful. You know, at the end of the day, we go through so much that our partner can become on the back burner of all of life stress. Like, I'm working, I'm doing this, I'm seeing clients. So at the end of the day, I kind of don't want to talk to nobody. You know, it could be that, but it's so important to just value that person, even if it's just to check in. Like, hey, how did your day go? Or I'm thankful. Thank you for cleaning up. Thank you for doing the small things. And just giving that gratitude while you have that person, because life is short. These experiences are short. Everything is going so fast, as we said, like we're flying through our 20s. So acknowledging that and being present in the moment. That's another thing too, about being present. I think that's so important. A lot of times we spend in our minds thinking about the past, things that already happened. We don't have control of them no more. That happened. And in the future, things that may or may not happen. And it's very little time that we spend right in that area of present in the things that we can control. So we often are working on the things that we can't control, putting our mental energy towards things that are going to happen or may not happen, or things that already happened, and not really tuning into the things that are happening for us right now.
Yeah, being present, I think, is really hard because we live in a rat race culture, and we're just taught to keep going after you finish this or after you accomplish that, like move on to something else. And I think just sitting still and existing with another person is really beneficial. Yeah. My last question for you is, what is something that you wish you would have known about relationships in your early 20s?
Wow, that's a really great question. I think that for me, something that we mentioned about conflict is that conflict is not always a bad thing. I wish I would have developed, especially with friendships. I think this applies to more. I did not have boundaries. I lacked personal boundaries because I thought that having boundaries was mean, right? Like, it was rude to say, like, no, I don't want to do that for you, friend. I love you though, but I can't do that for you right now because I'm stretched for my limits. So early on, like for me, I was kind of a people pleaser, and I just did what I felt people wanted of me to please them. And what I learned in the long run was the only person who was losing in that situation was me. I was giving everybody else, filling their cup. And at the end of the day, I was depleted. And so when I learned to set boundaries and I learned to develop healthy boundaries in my relationship, I became able to communicate better. I was able to deal with conflict better. I was able to address things head on that were like upsetting me. And I think that just overall improved my relationships. And what I learned too was that there's nothing wrong with setting boundaries. Like, boundaries are for me. And if people don't like my boundaries, that's on them.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
If you can give one piece of advice to 20-somethings about relationships, this doesn't have to be just romantic. It could be platonic or relationship with self. What is something that you wish every 20-something would know about relationship? I think I'll say something profound. I'll say what I've learned.
Okay, yeah.
I've learned that if you don't invest in yourself, it's really hard for you to be successful in any relationship, even yourself. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that I put a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy, and a lot of identity in what I could do for other people. Mm-hmm. And when I moved to DC and when I didn't have a job, I wasn't the chapter president anymore. Mm-hmm. I didn't have any accolades. I wasn't in a relationship. There was nothing to me. Then what? And so I realized that, you know what, let me work on myself. Let me figure out who I am. What are attributes that no one can take from me? No matter if I don't have this job, no matter if I don't have this accolade, I know I'm funny. I am a funny girl.
You are
okay?
funny.
I'm honest. I'm patient. I'm empathetic. And those are the things that started to fuel me. And then I was able to really become a better version of myself and actively pour into people in a genuine way, not just a way to like, oh, now you like me or now I pleased you, but it was in a way that was very fruitful for me and mutually beneficial. So that's something I've learned about relationship.
I love that, Taylor. You made me think of a point of a lot of times in our 20s, we attach our self-worth to what we accomplish, to our output, right? To what can I do in a day? How much have I gotten done? What are my accolades? What are my degrees? What jobs do I work? What career do I have? What does my partner do? Like all of those things. And none of those equate to our worth, because when they're all gone, like you said, what is still standing? And those personal values of honesty, of empathy, I think those are the things that we can hold on to. And for me, that has been my evolution into a therapist, really. Like, I've always been the fun, like, very kind.
Yeah, you have.
Fun girl. And like super kind to a fault. Like, I'm real nice. Like, before I had boundaries, right? Before I read that book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace.
Yeah.
I was super just kind and compassionate, but what does that mean if I allow people to walk over me? What does that mean if I don't set boundaries for myself? What does that mean if I don't have a personal value system? And when I sat down in therapy and really developed that for myself of, okay, what does this look like? Yes, I'm kind, but that don't mean that I'm a pushover. Yes, I'm empathetic, but that means that if I can't hold this space for you, friend, right now, I can't hold this space for you. And I think that having those honest conversations with ourselves is a part of that personal growth and evolution. And as we work on finding identity, it's important to know that it's not a destination. This is a lifelong process that we're embarking on. And our human experiences, the things that we go through, will constantly shift our lens in the way that we view things, the way that we see things, and how we interact with people in our relationships, friendships, and romantic. So for my 20-somethings, I think the biggest lesson is just enjoy the ride, and be present in everything that you can be, because it is a beautiful one, and it's also one that will challenge you and push you to your greatest strength and your greatest self.
Yeah. And that reminds me of a Drake quote.
Hey, I quote him.
But
Girl.
he said, live for today, plan for tomorrow, party tonight.
Yeah.
And that's not a deep quote. That's not a deep quote at all. But I think it's just like, no, literally live your life.
Yeah.
Like, we are young. I don't want to minimize or negate the fact that we are young.
Yeah.
And not everything should be taken so deep. I think there is a level of, like, if I want to go on a date and go on another date, and then go on another date, that's okay. I can do that. You know, I am a young hot girl.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a level of like, no, I'm gonna live for today. I'm gonna make sure I'm accomplishing my goals. So I'm gonna plan for tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm a party tonight.
I love that. I'm a party tonight.
On that note, I am just really appreciative of this conversation. Claudia, we've known each other in such a deep and intimate way, and we've seen each other through all walks of life. And, you know, we've put a lot of importance and stress on relationships romantically, but I do think that you can find so much fulfillment, if not as much fulfillment, in your actual girlfriends or guy friends relationships as well. So I appreciate you, and I love you so much.
Thank you, Taylor. This has been a testimony to that and how valuable friendships are. We've known each other for so long, and just to see you bask in all of your amazingness and just be who you are and follow your dreams, it's so amazing. I'm sitting on your show right now, which is like crazy. But thank you for having me as a guest on 2 Decades Deep.
Of course, love you down.
Love you down, girl.